the problem that women have in leadership positions. It's usually fairly difficult for women to be leaders, and the reason is because they're not seen as leadership potential. They have the wrong personality to be a leader. And of course, this is really kind of unfortunate. Potentially one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton lost. There's a lot of reasons why she lost, but one of them may be that some people just couldn't see her as a leader. They didn't want a woman to be the president of the United States, and even if they would accept a woman, they wouldn't accept her. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the last election. Really strange election. There was a woman running for the Republican nomination, a lady by the name of Carly Fiorina, and Emory has already said that he liked her. He thought she was a good candidate, but Trump was able to marginalize her by attacking the fact that she wasn't attractive. And it's not that she wasn't that attractive. It was just somebody that he didn't find attractive, and people thought that was funny. He also attacked her voice because her voice was kind of nasal, just a little bit nasal, and so he attacked her voice. He said, wow, when Fiorina talks, I think he called her Carly, when Carly talks, boy, does it just set your nerves on edge? And of course, there were people that thought exactly the same thing, but of course, when you're talking about your a potential leader, voice is the last thing you really worry about. And the other thing that he said was that her platform was pitter-patter, which was, once again, he's marginalizing her thoughts as senseless and useless women's thoughts, and hence the name, hence the word pitter-patter. And doggone it, I've got your survey done, and I left it on my desk. So I apologize.
That's okay.
I was thinking, as I was putting all my stuff together to come here, I said I need to remember to put that in my bag, and I forgot. It was like seconds later, it just disappeared from my brain. It was gone. Many people see good leaders as having agentic traits. They're independent, they're aggressive, they're assertive, they're competent. That's what we need for a president. We talked about who you found to be good presidents last time, and a lot of you said Barack Obama was a good president. None of you said that Trump was a good president, which is kind of scary because he's president right now. So we'll see what happens. What did Obama say? Oh, he said that if he runs for another office, his wife's going to leave him. That's what he said, which is kind of funny, I guess. Women are stereotyped as having communal traits. They're friendly, they're unselfish, they're expressive. And of course, one of the reasons that you've never had a tribal chairman who was female is because some people say that traditionally women aren't supposed to be leaders, as curious as that is. It is. There are other tribes that have had female leaders. Wilma Tinkiller, is that her name? Tinkiller? Anyway, she was the tribal chairman of the Crow. Who else? Well, Fort Belknap had a female tribal chairman as well. Interesting situation. Anyway, other tribes have had female leaders, but this one doesn't seem to think that that's a possibility. There are religions that won't allow females to preach to males. The Baptist Church, for example, won't allow females to preach to males, which is kind of curious. So there are religious strictures against female leadership. There are individual strictures against female leadership. If a female had run for president in 1950, no one would have looked at her. They would have ignored her. Same thing in 1960, maybe in 1970. It's possible that people would have gone, well, we're just rejecting you because you're female. But as time has gone by, of course, we have seen females in more and more leadership positions. There have been very important people, very important women who have been in government.
I read pitter-patter on there. What's that mean?
Pitter-patter?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just senseless words that don't mean anything.
Oh,
Okay, sorry about that.
Also heard the word Twitter page. What's that mean?
Twitter page?
Twitter page?
Twitter-pated?
Yeah.
Twitter-pated means silly thoughts. Just
Oh, okay.
silly thoughts. Twitter-pated. Women are in a double bind as leaders. If they are warm and communal, they are perceived as having low leadership potential. If they are agentic and forceful, they are often perceived negatively for not acting like a woman should. And of course, this was one of the complaints of Hillary Clinton, that she was a ball buster. That's the term, I guess, that we should put that in here someplace, but we won't. That she was a ball buster and nobody wanted to work for her. But of course, she had been the Secretary of State for much of Obama's administration, and she seems to have done a pretty good job. People complained about Benghazi, which was a little confusing since, well, there's a lot of things have gone on throughout our history where people have died, and here 4 people died, and my goodness, who would have thought the world was coming to an end. In 2014, only 24 of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were women, and the boards of directors of U.S. companies included only 17 women. That's from Catalyst 2014. Things are not much different elsewhere. That 17% figure is actually among the highest in the world, except for places in Europe, especially Scandinavia. 41% of the CEOs in Norway are female. 27% of the CEOs in Sweden are female. 27% of the CEOs in Finland are female. 21% of the CEOs in the United Kingdom are female, and 18% of the CEOs in France are female. If a woman's style of leadership is stereotypically masculine, in that she is autocratic and bossy and task-oriented, she is evaluated more negatively than men who have the same leadership styles. This is especially true if the men are doing the evaluating. Of course, men don't want to work for women. Now, personally, I've always worked for a woman, working in medicine. Where else? Oh, I was working in hospitals and whatnot. I almost always worked for women, and I had no problem with it. But of course, some individuals are a little bit more macho than I am. Working in education, of course, there's a lot of women in education. My boss right now is not my direct boss, but the provost is, of course, female. So I'm working for female right now, and that's okay. I don't feel emasculated. I don't feel like my testicles have been cut off or something, which would be pretty stupid. But some men have a hard time handling it. Another danger that women leaders face, because women are perceived as being more communal, they are often thought to be better at managing crises, particularly ones that involve interpersonal problems such as conflict between high-level managers. And I told you the story of my wife last time. When she was in the military, she was a hospital administrator, and if they had a hospital that was not working correctly because they had a jackass for a boss, they would move her into that position, and she'd clean things up. She was a fireman, as it were, and she did a very good job. She never failed. She was always successful. And the reason that she was successful is because she listened to people. A lot of people like to tell you what to do, and then you have to do it. It's kind of the way that Trump seems to think that the world works. He's always been a spoiled rich kid, and everybody has done whatever the hell he wanted them to do. And now that he's president of the United States, he's running into things like, oh, I don't know, the law. Oh, he's not having a good time. And he's especially not having a good time here lately. So we'll see what happens. I keep saying that, don't I? Maybe we'll see what happens. Well, of course we're going to see what happens. That might seem like a good thing, that these individuals can take over in a situation where there is a crisis, trusting women leaders to solve problems, but it has a downside in which women are more likely to be put in precarious, high-risk positions where it is difficult to succeed. And actually that is true. My wife was very lucky. Luck doesn't have anything to do with it. She was really good at her job. And because of that, whenever they moved her into a position, a lot of women in the military feel like they have to act like they have to act like a man. They have to be bossy, just like a man is. That's the only way you can lead people, is by telling them what to do and making sure that they do it by God, and not listening to anybody else. That's the way some men are. That's why some men are good leaders. But of course, that doesn't always work, and especially in her situation, that wouldn't have worked at all. But she was very successful. Michelle Ryan, like I said, she was almost the head of the Corps. She almost got her star. She was one step away from getting her star, and she didn't. They went the other direction. And decided to hire medical people. Michelle Ryan and her colleagues have called being put in crisis management roles, dealing with interpersonal problems, as a glass cliff. Even when women have broken through the glass ceiling into top leadership positions, they're more likely than men to be put in charge of units that are in crisis and in which the risk of failure is very high. The next chapter is about relationships, men and women, females and males. And there's a difference between men and women, obviously. And of course, there's no way that we can take that away from the equation. The males have testicles and females don't. Females are females and males are males, and there's just nothing that we can do about that. But the reality is, of course, sometimes you have to overlook that in a situation where you're dealing with leadership, and assume that everything is going to be equal. But everything isn't equal. Nothing's ever equal. If somebody's tall, they get to be tribal chairman. Isn't that the way it works? All of our presidents are tall, have been tall, especially here lately. They've all been fairly tall. So height has something to do with it. Attractiveness has something to do with it. We talked about how preachers who are more attractive are more successful evangelists and can become successful evangelists. That's just the way it works. Ugly people need not apply. Short people need not apply. That's just the way it works. So if we're talking about males and females, potentially we're talking about attractiveness and unattractiveness. This is Mary Barra. She is the CEO of General Motors. And she was made the CEO in 2014. General Motors at that point had a really serious problem. They had been building defective cars for about 10 years, and they knew it, and they didn't do anything about it. So something was going to happen, and something did happen, and it wasn't very pleasant. In 2014, they had already downsized. They'd already done away with Pontiac and Oldsmobiles. Now they're downsizing again. I don't know if you heard about this. Even Chevrolet is reducing the number of cars that they're making. They're also abandoning their electric car, the Leaf. They're doing away with the Leaf, which should be kind of interesting. Anyway, in 2014, Mary Barra became the first female CEO of a major global automaker. In this case, it was General Motors. Within months, she had to announce plans for General Motors to recall over 11 million cars due to defective design components that the company had known about for nearly 10 years. So they'd been building defective cars and they knew it. So they had to recall 11 million cars. Could Barra become another example of a woman who broke through a glass ceiling only to find herself on a glass cliff? And that's actually not what has happened. She's still in charge, but she's also the one that is overseeing the dismantling of General Motors. So it's really kind of interesting. If we look at Mary Barra, we can see that she's relatively attractive. Leadership has to do with height and attractiveness, as curious as that is. And we're going to talk about this in the next chapter. Looking at leadership around the world, researchers have discovered that different cultures seek different attributes in their managers. Autonomous leadership, where the workers are independent of superiors and the leader stays distant from the workers, is popular in Europe, but not in South and Central America. We have more autocratic leaders in Central and South America, and that's what they want. That's what they seek. But there was universal agreement about the value of two leadership qualities. One is charisma. We want our leaders to be charismatic, and we also want them to be team-oriented. In other words, they focus on the team. Now, right now, we're having a little bit of trouble with Donald Trump because he's not very team-oriented. He doesn't seem to be team-oriented. He is fairly charismatic, or at least he talks a good ball game. Seems to talk a good ball game. Every time he does something, it's huge, or it's massive, or it's the best, or I can remember that he was talking about healthcare. He's going to come up with the most amazing healthcare that in the United States is going to be the best in the world. So he always speaks in hyperbole. Yes, sir.
You think that's because we have human beings have a fear of the unknown and the future and uncertainty, and then when we see somebody who has confidence, then we think, hey, they'll get us through that.
There you go.
Or they talk to our fears.
Could be. It could be. There's what he was talking to a lot of fears, and he was creating a lot of fears. He was talking to people's paranoia. There was a lot of paranoia out on the internet, if you look at it. Breitbart was always talking about conspiracy theories. He's got a guy that is one of his advisors that all he talks about is conspiracy theories and how we need to do this because of all this horrible stuff. He's the guy that seems to have something to do with immigration right now. He's the one that told Trump that Stephen Miller's the guy's name. I don't know. Little weaselly guy, little pencil neck. See, I'm insulting the way he looks. This is all important stuff. It was really kind of interesting that one of the major females in Trump's administration is a really attractive woman, Kirsten Nielsen, who's not in his administration. He just fired her last weekend. But it's really kind of curious that she was a part of his administration. Who else was in there? Betsy DeVos. Not an unattractive woman. It's really kind of, and a tall woman. She's really tall and slender.
The UN, the lady that was at the UN?
That was Haley Barbour.
Nikki Haley?
Nikki Haley. Who's Haley Barbour? Nikki Haley, exactly. Yeah. She was the governor of South Carolina. Kind of interesting. South Carolina is the most conservative state in the union. Yeah, South Carolina and Louisiana are the two most conservative states in the union. And here they elected, not only did they elect a female, but they also elected a woman that isn't white. She has Indian ancestry, Asian Indian, American ancestry. We don't really get the two groups mixed up there. Anyway, but she quit because she didn't like his policies. Fascinating stuff. You know, you watch this stuff and you try to understand where he's coming from, where Trump's coming from, and it's difficult because he doesn't seem to be going in one direction. He seems to be going in a lot of different directions at the same time, and he's not following the Republican policies, the conservative policies. So it's really kind of interesting. I don't know. I've always complained that we didn't need a businessman as a president of the United States. That it wouldn't work because he would be too greedy. He'd be too self-absorbed. I mean, that's the only way you can become a good businessman is by focusing on one thing, on your company.
On profit.
On profit, exactly. And what profit is there as being the president of the United States?
Speaking of leadership, are we going to discuss anything about people who seek out politics, political leadership, like the mentality?
No, but we can talk about it right now if you want.
It always seems like the weirdos are always the ones trying to get behind a wheel.
Is it? Is it the weirdos? Jimmy Carter, and the Bushes, and Bill Clinton.
I think the Bushes are the same as Trump in that I don't think they did it to serve or to give anything back. I think they just wanted that lifetime access to top secret information so that they could buy and sell oil because they're oilmen.
Well, you know, that's a
Based on the market.
that's a possibility.
Because I mean the pay is so low. It's not like
Yeah, they're not making a whole lot of money.
yeah.
But while you're in office, you have access to a lot of different insider trading and whatnot. Yeah, the old man was, Bush 1 was head of the CIA for a while before he became president of the United States. That's, he has access to not only the secrets in the United States, but he has access to all the secrets around the world. At the time, of course, there was an organization called the Trilateral Commission, that was like all the rich people in the world was the Trilateral Commission. And theoretically, they came together to try to combat poverty, but at the same time, they were also getting together and making all kinds of multi-billion-dollar deals all around the world, selling oil here and there and whatnot. Oil has really changed the world. It may have been the reason for the war in Iraq. Could have been. The excuse that they gave had to do with Bush 1 being Saddam Hussein trying to assassinate Bush 1 on several different occasions. Of course, he wasn't successful. Fascinating. That's a good question. Why do people get into politics?
I noticed like a lot of like here on the reservation, the chapter level, and especially going to Winter Rock. I always wonder why people clamor to that position. I don't know if it's ego, just it's certainly not the money. They're feeding something else because they don't make. I guess relatively speaking, I guess if you're living here on a reservation, it's a high-paying job. But I just always wonder why people.
But they always buy a new ride, don't they? They always buy a new ride, and that's what people complain about. His ride is worth, twice as much as he makes in a year. He's just bought a $60,000 pickup truck. It's all jacked up and tricked out and everything. And it's not just here. It's if you go to any reservation, the guy becomes tribal chairman. He buys a new pickup truck. Same way everywhere. The Blackfeet, the Salish Kootenai, the Cheyenne, everybody, they do the same thing. Standing Rock.
I guess that's more politics and poverty. You know how poverty affects politics here?
Right. Yeah.
It's probably different. I don't know if it is different for people from affluent areas. Maybe they're motivated by the same thing too. I don't know. Something self-serving. It just seems to be self-serving.
There is something self-serving about it. Why are all these billionaires in his administration? Mnuchin. Mnuchin was, they called him before Congress yesterday. And the lady that Trump said had a really low IQ, the lady from California, she was the chairman of the committee. And the two of them just knocked heads. Mnuchin had no respect for her at all, and he showed it. And of course, he can be held in contempt because he was asked to come in and testify before the committee, and he was very disrespectful. So we'll see what happens. Well, I keep saying that, don't I? Mnuchin was just terrible to her. I treated her like she's an African-American woman from California. So we'll see what happens. I'm sorry.
I'm going to keep score now.
Okay. Since I keep saying the same thing over and over again. It's curious. Why does somebody want to be in charge? Well, one reason is because they make a lot more money. I'm sure tribal chairmen make more money than I do. I'm sure they're making more money than I am.
It's just weird because I can see it now, like at the student level.
Mhm.
You'll see some people that will get involved in like student clubs,
Mhm.
and some people just want to be involved and they'll get in.
Sure.
And you can always identify that one person who's bucking to take control of the group and pushing their way up. It's easy to see it, you know, and I just always wonder why.
Why are they doing that?
Yeah, what do you need to?
Well, it looks good on their CV, on their resume. Questions about cultural differences in leadership are receiving increasing attention because in global economy, work groups are becoming more diverse and managers from different cultures have increasingly frequent contact. And of course, if we're talking about Donald Trump, he's a global economist, even though he keeps calling himself a nationalist rather than a globalist. As confusing as that is, there's nobody more global than somebody who has built buildings all over the world. That sounds fairly global rather than national to me. But we're not gonna deal with that. Once upon a time in the world, we had to decide whether the Soviets were going to attack us or not. It was the world bifurcated. Well, actually, it trifurcated. It was chopped up into three different groups. Countries that were democracies, countries that were communist, and countries that were third world countries, hence the name third world. And they were third world because they didn't ally themselves either with the United States and the democratic countries of the world or with the communists. They were third world countries. And one of those countries was India, one of the most populous countries in the world. China, of course, the most populous country in the world, was communist, and so is the Soviet Union, which is the largest country in the world, has the largest landmass. The Soviet Union did. And so this was a question. We both had nuclear weapons. We could both destroy each other at a push of a button. So we had to decide how we were going to deal with that group. Both the United States, both the people that were from democracies and the people that were from the communist realm, they were bullies, and they bullied people all over the world. We've been doing it since the end of World War II. It's the first time we ever got to become bullies. Before that, it was the Brits that were the bullies. But now all of a sudden, we were the bullies, and we got used to it, and we liked it. We loved it. We loved pushing people over and telling them they had to do this or that or the other. And this is known as the social dilemma, as strange as that may seem. So when we talk about social dilemmas, what we're really talking about is the organizations that came together, the research organizations that came together to figure out what was going to happen next. And so the biggest question was, are we going to die in a nuclear war? And if you watch movies from the late 40s or early 50s, that's what the movies were about. A lot of movies about total destruction. A social dilemma is a conflict in which the most beneficial action for an individual, if chosen by most people, will have harmful effects on everyone. This is all known as game theory. So that we had to figure out what they're thinking and how we would react if they did something, because this was happening all over the world. The communists become very powerful in Indochina. So what's going to happen next? Do we need to confront them? Do we need to leave them alone? What's going to happen? If we leave them alone, what's going to happen? Are they going to start bullying all the other countries around them? That was the question. And of course, this came up almost immediately, right after World War II. The Soviets tried to move into Austria, and we had to keep them out of Austria. They tried to move into Greece, and we had to keep them out of Greece. Now, most of the Balkan countries are actually Eastern Bloc countries, or they were Eastern Bloc countries. In other words, they were allied with the Soviets. All of those countries. So Greece was right on the border. So was Iran. So we needed to figure out what was going to happen. We did that through game theory, and that had to do with social dilemmas. What is best for an individual is not always the best for a group as a whole, and of course this was part of the argument. Social dilemmas. So this is Stephen King. Stephen King decided he was going to create a social dilemma. And what he did was he started writing a book. Everybody loves Stephen King. He was extremely popular back in the 1980s and 1990s. Everybody read his books. They're horror books. I've never read a Stephen King book. I've read a lot of books, but I've never read a Stephen King. Anyway, Stephen King decided he was going to put a book on the internet. And he told people that if 75% of them paid him $1, he would keep writing his book. And now if you've ever bought well, of course you bought textbooks, but if you had bought a novel, a Stephen King novel, it would probably cost you $18.75. Yeah, it's going to cost you that much money. So potentially he's going to actually make more money off of this, depending on how many chapters are in the book. And I don't know how he writes his books. Does he have a lot of chapters, or does he have short chapters or long chapters? Has he read Stephen King? Nobody? Okay, so I'm not exactly sure.
They're kind of long, I guess.
Are they long?
His books are probably pretty big. So.
Right, so there's maybe 25, 30 chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and each chapter is maybe 20, 30 pages long. Longer than that?
About that. I think.
Yeah, about 20, 30 pages. So he decided that he was going to write his book in installments. So the first installment were the first 2 chapters. And it was a novel called The Plant. And you can find this book if you want. It's not complete. He hasn't finished the book. But that has something to do with it. So we put it on the internet. He said, as long as 75% of the people pay me $1, then I will continue to write the book. The deal he offered was that he would continue writing as long as 75% of the people paid him the money. But you could download it for free. That was the deal. But 75% of the people needed to pay him the $1 in order for him to continue to write. If fewer than 75% of the people paid, he would stop writing and the people would never get the rest of the novel. King had devised a classic social dilemma, a conflict in which the most beneficial action for an individual will, if chosen by most people, be harmful to everyone. So if you download it for free, then you're screwing everybody else. Can I use that word? That's not that bad. It was to any individual's financial advantage to download King's novel free of charge and let other people pay. Let's just let everybody else pay. However, if too many people took this approach, everyone would lose because King said he would stop writing the novel. And everybody knew this. So would you pay or would you not? Would you give him the buck? Or would you download it for free?
I mean, if you're a big fan, I think you'd download it.
For free?
Yeah, but right there. That's what I'm trying to do.
And paying the buck? You wouldn't pay.
I see that.
You're going to pay the $1? You're going to pay the $1?
Not King, but maybe another artist, maybe another.
Would be okay.
But in theory, I would. If it
You
was
would
somebody
give him
else.
the buck. Okay. You paid the $1? Jeez.
I think I would prefer the book because I like to thumb through it.
Uh-huh.
Instead of it just.
On the internet. I'm
Yeah.
not an internet reader either.
Okay.
So you guys are good people. This is great. Stephen King should have kept writing his book. That's not what happened, of course. At first, people acted for the good of all. More than 75% paid for the first installment. As with many social dilemmas, however, people eventually acted in their own self-interest to the detriment of all. And they stopped. This is true.
I mean, is this
They
based
made a
off
movie
that?
of it.
Is this clip right here based off of that book?
Yeah, they made.
That's
a
why
movie.
he ended it with him killing himself, suicide.
I wish.
This character,
I
suicide.
don't
That's
know.
why I was asking if it was.
Yeah, they actually made a movie or television show. It was a television.
It's a small clip, to a bigger movie.
Yeah.
The character kills himself.
Yeah. The number of people who paid for their later installments dropped below 75%, and King stopped posting new ones saying on his website that the novel was on hiatus. and he has never finished the novel. Okay, let me give you another social dilemma. A man and his girlfriend are arrested with 5 pounds of cocaine in their possession. They are separated. The prosecutor knows that if he can get one to turn, they can charge the other one with possession with the intent to distribute, and they can put him in jail for 25 years. Otherwise, it is 5 years in probation for both for possession. So if neither of them admit that that it was their cocaine, if neither of them turn on the other one, then they both get 5 years. If one of them turns on the other one goes free, the other one is in jail for 25 years. Okay. This is a relatively common dilemma, actually. The person who testifies against their significant other will be charged with misdemeanor possession and get probation. And the question is, which one of them blinks first? Or do neither of them blink? I had a student that this is exactly what happened to her. But her drug was crystal meth. And it wasn't really her boyfriend, it was her supplier. And if she turned on him, if she told them who her supplier was, they would have put her on probation. If she didn't, then he went free and she went to jail for 5 years. This is up in Montana. What would you do? Your boyfriend and you have just been caught with, or maybe it was just him. Maybe you had nothing to do with it.
If I had nothing to do with it, then I'm turning him in.
Oh, you're going to turn him in? Okay, I was just curious.
I wouldn't say no.
You wouldn't say anything?
I'd rather go.
You'd rather go to jail for an extended length of time than
My integrity means more to me.
than rat on your friend? You do that too? You always agree with him.
Well, just that again.
He has good ideas. I'm going to start going the other way and see if he agrees with you. Would you drop a dime?
No, not to.
You go to jail for an extended length of time?
Well, you kind of get yourself in that position.
Yeah, you make your decision before you get pulled over.
Oh.
And you're already with that person. So.
No, the cops are going to give you a deal.
So it's like, you just can't put the blame on somebody else when you're already a part of it.
And you
from
know,
the beginning.
like, you can't just sit there and be like, I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
When you knew it was there, when
So-
you knew, they were in possession of that.
What would you do? Would you drop a dime? It costs you so much more than a dime to make a telephone. In the old days, it was a dime. Before that was a nickel. Would you drop a nickel on somebody? Okay.
You're supposed to look out for number one.
Well, look out for number one. Are you
Or you
going to
just
look out
like,
for
oh my
number one?
God.
You're going to look out for number two. Would you drop a dime on? See, I keep saying it. Would you turn in your significant other? You wouldn't do it?
I was in a situation like that once.
If you went to jail?
No, I got extra duty.
Oh.
Somebody
was-
took some stuff from the kitchen. When I was in boot camp, we were getting ready to go on block leave for Christmas. And some stuff came, it was food that came up missing. And they narrowed it down to our platoon and nobody would admit to who took it. And so they said,
You guys
if we can't get anybody to admit it, then nobody's going on leave.
Oh, jeez.
And people had already bought their plane tickets and people's families had already come to town, so
Right.
I said I did it.
Okay, I get that.
And then I felt bad for everybody, and so I got Article 15, and I got my money taken away. I got 14 days restriction. And
What about the guys that actually did it?
I don't know, but when everybody came back, everybody knew people because I told people I said I'm just going to go. I said I'm gonna go. I said it's not right that you guys all suffer because somebody's being a dick in here. Oh, excuse me. So I took the hit.
But somebody was a dick in there.
Yeah. So one person got away
Scot-free.
Scot-free, but in the end.
And you paid for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was already a private anyways. He just.
Yeah, you just lost this. Only a stripe, if there was a stripe
Yeah.
even there. Okay.
But everybody, when we came back, everybody was looking up to me.
There you go, now you were the leader.
Yeah.
And of course, the individual that actually did it, I don't know. So should we do that? Should we let people get off? If they commit a crime, should we just let them off?
Depends on the crime, I think.
Would you,
What?
Would you drop it?
would you drop a nickel?
You guys gotta understand, I was a narc when I was in the
Oh my
service.
gosh, you were that guy, Bruce.
I was the guy collecting people's urine. I was the one that, if they had a dirty urine, they had a dirty urine. I was offered lots of things.
No, with your significant other,
I'm sorry?
with your significant other.
Well, I don't have any significant other.
Your wife.
Actually, that kind of happened to me once upon a time. My first wife left me, and then when she came back with a baggie full of, not a baggie, a garbage bag full of marijuana and a whole, like $300 or $400 worth of speed. And of course, she thinks she's got money because she's got all these pills and all this pot.
I think it just depends, really.
And I threw it away. I threw it all away, and she was mad. She said, "You're throwing away money." And I said, "Well,
Wilson went to jail for possession of narcotics, controlled substance. Wilson and Ronald.
was it mescaline?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
He went down, he got peyote,
Sure,
and he brought it back, but they had already had, because it was illegal,
sure,
so they had a plan, somebody has to get arrested,
sure.
so we can take it to court, so we can
Right.
argue the legal merits
Right.
of the law.
And they changed it in the 70s.
And they changed it because of him going to jail.
Yeah.
He got arrested for having peyote.
Yeah, but that was the plan, though.
Okay, well, so do you want me to tell you what happened to the young lady up north?
Yeah.
Or do you care what happened to the young lady up
I
north?
left off.
Well, what's
On a
the
cliffhanger.
She went to jail, and she bragged about it afterwards. She said, "I'll never rat on anybody." And I was thinking, you didn't even like this guy. He was just your supplier. But she wouldn't do it because that's the way she was raised. She was raised not to squeal on anybody, which I thought was kind of an odd way to be raised. In essence, you should never put yourself in that kind of a situation. I was almost put in that situation by my first wife when she came back with all that stuff. But I threw it away because I didn't want to get in trouble. And she would have gone to jail. Actually, she was being followed by the cops. They were trying to get her to turn on her supplier, but so she ran home to me. I was in the service, and I had the kids. So she claimed that she needed to go home. She had to see her babies. In essence, she was running away from the cops. And I'm thinking, well, of course, yeah, until she, I know. Why? It's where I got my babies. It's where I got my kids, from that lady. So, yeah, it was worth something anyway. It was worth kids. Anyway, okay, so this is known as a prisoner's dilemma. Which one will turn first? And if, of course, if neither of them turn, if you trust your significant other not to turn on you, then of course you're just going to sit there and go, I'm not going to turn, not going to turn. And then of course, what's the probability that he's going to actually turn you in? And you're going to spend 25 years in jail. This happens over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Whoever turns first. I've told you the murder story of my cousin. I had a cousin that he and another guy were hitchhiking. This guy picked them up. They decided that they were going to steal his car, so they made some excuse to get the guy out of his car. Then they ran over him. They hit him with the car, and he wasn't dead, so they kept running over him. The other guy was the one that did the driving. My cousin was only 16 years old at the time. The other kid was 18. So when this is how smart they are. And they did this in Illinois. They killed the guy in Illinois. So then they drove the car back to Muncie, which is where they live. And they decided they needed to get rid of the car. The guy was in the back. They had put him in the trunk. I know, I'm laughing and there's dead people in this and I shouldn't be laughing. But so they decided that they're going to drive the car into the reservoir. They're gonna hide it in the reservoir. So the reservoir is like this man-made lake you've got right over here. So they drove it out into the reservoir, but of course reservoirs, the bank is kind of angled. So they drove it out there, and by the time it stopped, it was still above the water. So they didn't hide it at all. All they did was stick it out in the middle of the reservoir. So somebody towed it out, and of course they opened the trunk and they found the dead man. And then of course there was an investigation. So my cousin, who's really smart and has knocked heads with the law a lot, he decided that he was going to keep his son from being arrested. So he sent him to Ohio. Ohio and Indiana don't have extradition. As strange as that may seem, they don't have extradition because Indiana executes underage people. Okay? Okay, so this kid's only 16 years old, and now he's in Ohio, so that he doesn't have to come back to Indiana to face trial. The other guy who's 18 years old turned himself in. And he's the one that testified against my cousin. And he goes to jail for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. This is how smart my cousin is. He's only 16 years old, so he's an underage individual. But he comes back to Indiana to see his girlfriend, who's not his girlfriend anymore. This is how stupid he is. This is how dumb we are in my family. He came back to see a girl who had been his girlfriend, but was now dating somebody else. So when he came back, guess what she did? She called the police for two reasons. One, he was a fugitive. The other reason was because he was trying to mess with her, and her boyfriend, she had another boyfriend, so she turned him in. This is how stupid we are. But he came back when he was 18 years old. So now they arrest him and they're going to try him as an adult. Because he's 18 years old, they can do that. So now he's tried as an adult. So he can be executed. Which they didn't do. They put him in jail. He's out of jail now, but he spent 35 years in jail. That's how dumb he is. But if he had stayed in Ohio, he would have been okay. If he hadn't come back to see his girlfriend, who wasn't his girlfriend, he would have been okay. The other guy dropped a dime on him, spent 7 years in prison, and my cousin, who didn't actually do the killing, spent 35 years in prison. But that's the way it works. It's the guy that talks first. That's the prisoner's dilemma. There is no honor among thieves. There is no honor among criminals. Or maybe there is. If you think there is, don't ever get involved with these people. Anyway, that's what happened to my cousin. He was brilliant. This kid had an IQ in the 150 range. But he's stupid because he thought that this guy would turn on him. Of course he did. In order to spend less years in prison, of course he did.
I wonder how many people that chose not to rat, I guess, end up regretting it later.
Oh. If the other guy turns on them, then they regret it almost immediately. They put faith in somebody that is unfaithful, is faithless. So
I had another situation that was real similar to this. I got arguing with my girlfriend. One of the neighbors called the police. She started hitting me. So the neighbors call the police, they hear a fight go on.
sure. And
Cops
you're
show
getting
up.
the shit beat out of you.
I got slapped a couple, I got a couple of good shots. The cops show up and started asking me, because they saw the marks.
Right.
So they separated us. They started checking her. Of course, she didn't have any marks.
Sure.
I was the one with the marks. They asked me if she hit me. And I said no. So they said, if you don't tell us what happened, because I wouldn't tell them anything, they said,
Right.
we're going to take you in for disturbing the peace. Because people call the cops now. I said, do what you got to do, man. Thankfully, they let me go. I had to leave the house, even though it was my place.
Right.
I had to leave for the night. But I was thankful that I didn't go to jail. But now looking backwards on it, I wish I would have been honest.
Oh, it's
situation.
she had beaten up. Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend that, this is up north again. His girlfriend had the cops on speed dial. And so anytime he didn't do what she wanted him to do, she would threaten to call the police and say that he was beating her up. And of course, the one time that they were in a conflict, he was trying to fend her off. And of course, the police show up and he's got his hands on her. And, you know, she's been trying to stab him. He's got stab wounds all over his arms. He's the one that they took to jail. I know.
Yeah, they assume it's the man right off the bat.
Right off the bat. Men are evil. You can write that down. Men are evil. Okay.
To be on the test.
The Prisoner's Dilemma was originally developed by Flood and Drescher at Rand, the Rand Corporation. Rand Corporation is in Santa Monica, California. Rand Corporation was started as Rand stands for Research and Development. It was research and development for the Air Force. So the Rand Corporation is out there. One of the reasons that they put this organization together was for game theory. They were talking about nuclear war. And of course, the Air Force is the ones that would have dropped the bomb. The Air Force became a separate entity from the Army in 1948. And of course, their main mission was not only defending the United States with their fighters, but also bombing the bad guys with their nuclear weapons. And that's the reason they actually put the Air Force together, was because they needed. They had a different mission than everybody else. Everybody else's mission, the infantry, the Navy, were for a more defensive situation. But the Air Force was put together as an offensive organization to blow people up. So the Rand Corporation, and this is Flood and Drescher. 1950, they came up with the first game theory, and the first game theory was the Prisoner's Dilemma. The concept was later revised by Taylor in 1992, and that's what you just saw. The original was a little bit different from this version, but there are other games that we play. You have two players, they can pick option X or option Y. If they both pick X, both of them win $3. If they pick Y, they both lose $1. If you pick X and your friend picks Y, you lose $6 and your friend wins $6. If you pick Y and your friend picks X, you win $6 and your friend loses $6. This is the way, and we could play this game eventually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This was on one of the assignments, those surveys you had us on the assignment. This was one of them.
So this is a tough one. This is really interesting. You're trying to make as much money as you possibly can. So self-interest is is really what you're after. But if you always pick X, and your friend picks Y, then you lose $6. So you can't always pick X, because sometimes your friend may pick Y, in which case you can lose $6. Wow. Try playing this game sometime and see what happens. If you both pick X, then you both win $3. But if you keep picking X, I'm going to pick Y so that you lose $6 and I win $6. Eventually that's what's going to happen. If both of you pick Y, then both of you lose $1. So the best deal is for both of you to pick X. But that person may decide that they want to make $6, so they'll pick Y one time. Now all of a sudden you'll retaliate by you pick Y. But if both of you pick Y, then both of you lose $1. This is how business works. People are more likely to adopt a cooperative strategy. Come on, let's both pick X. Of course, you can't say this, or maybe you can say this. Go ahead, say whatever you want. Go ahead and negotiate and see what happens next. Because if you say, I'm going to pick X, if you pick Y, then I'm screwed. I said that word again. That's twice today. I know, there's something wrong. Okay. So you can negotiate, and you can try to get that person to cooperate with you, but that doesn't always work. If you play a game with a friend, then you're more likely to actually cooperate. Of course, if they're a friend, you're planning on interacting with them in the future. You don't want to play that kind of a game with them. You try to cooperate. You want to be friendly because you're friends, you're buddies. If we change the name from the Wall Street game to the community game, we can increase the percentage of people who cooperate by 33%, from 33% to 71%. And this is what happened in one study. But we play these games all the time because the reality is we're negotiating with people around the world all the time on a continuous basis. When the nuclear threat was very real around the world, we were playing this game on all the time. I mean, continually. So when Iran collapsed, Iran is right next to the Soviet Union. We were deathly afraid that the Russians were going to move in and take all of our equipment. We had billions and billions of dollars worth of equipment in Iran at the time, and it collapsed. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, what's going to happen next? Are they going to invade some other country? Is this the beginning of World War III, their invasion of Afghanistan? At the time, we were in Germany. We were stationed in Germany. And the Russians massed tanks on the East German border. That's what was going on. So what's going to happen next? It was a very real game. One of these games. I'm going to show you this card. You show me another card. If you increase the threat, increase what I see as a threat, then potentially I'll retaliate. And this was very real. This is the Cold War that we talk about. It was just a constant chess match that nobody ever won. It was a game that went on for 40 years. Yeah, went on for 40 years. And of course I was in the military at the time. So we had to do something. We were constantly being threatened by the Russians. And of course, those of us who fought in the Cold War fought. Those of us who were in the military during the Cold War, when we found out that the Russians had done something with the last election, we were very upset because they were always our enemies. They were the bad guys. They were the ones we were always talking about. We found out about their jet airplanes, their fighters. We knew about their bombers. We knew about their nuclear weapons. We knew everything about them. And we talked about this all the time because that was part of the game. And we knew what we had. Well, we tried to hide it. Sometimes you try to hide what you're going to do next. So every time they created a new weapon, we had to create a new weapon. When they developed MIRVs are where you shoot a ballistic missile into the air and then it splits into many different warheads. When they developed that, actually we developed it first, then they had to develop it so that they were just as dangerous as we were. When they developed a large nuclear package to take out our silos, we had to do exactly the same thing, just to counter them. And it was this long game that we played. And the reason that they harassed you guys to mine more uranium is because we needed that uranium. But this isn't the only uranium in the democratic world. Canada has uranium as well. The Rocky Mountains are full of it. But in this area, you guys had a lot of uranium. So you guys became part of this whole nuclear equation that was going on in the world. And of course, the way that we knew what the Russians were going to do was by playing this game scenario on a continual basis. And we kept creating new game scenarios. As stupid as that sounds.
Sounds like a relationship.
But
Bad relationship.
it was a horrible relationship. It was like your wife hates you, and you don't know what's going to happen next. The tit-for-tat strategy is a means of encouraging cooperation by at first acting cooperatively, but then always responding the way that your opponent did, cooperatively or competitively on the previous trial. So this is tit-for-tat. And this is the way we dealt with the Russians. If the Russians did something aggressive, then we did something aggressive. If they were acting cooperatively, then we acted cooperatively. As weird as that sounds. So for the longest time, we couldn't visit the Soviet Union. We couldn't go to Russia. But then all of a sudden, they allowed us to send tourists, to send people to the Soviet Union. And so we did the same thing. We had this educational exchange with the Russians. So we were trading students back and forth. As weird as that sounds. So when they were cooperative, we were cooperative. We would send them agricultural supplies, and they would send us, I don't know, whatever. They would send us something else. So we played this game of cooperation and competition. Now the problem was, I don't know how you feel about Ronald Reagan, but when Ronald Reagan became president, he said, I don't want to play this game anymore. And he said, the next time you guys are aggressive, then World War III is going to start. That's when I was in Germany. Oh my God. So the Russians invade Afghanistan. The Russians invade Afghanistan. Reagan becomes president of the United States. I thought he was going to start World War III. I thought he was. Because he stopped playing this game, this tit-for-tat thing.
Reciprocity.
Yeah, there was no reciprocity going back and forth between the two of us. It looked really ugly there for about 3 years. It was looking nasty. If you were in the military at the time, and people liked Reagan because he was able to face the Russians down. What was actually going on was that the Russians were talking a good ball game, but they weren't playing it. It was kind of like Saddam Hussein with his weapons of mass destruction. He was talking about weapons of mass destruction more than he was actually putting together weapons of mass destruction. And the Russians were doing the same thing. Their infrastructure was just collapsing. And of course, those of us who knew what was going on, we were saying, yeah, but the Russians can't really fight a war. Look at their tanks. Half of their tanks don't work. You know, their nuclear weapons, they don't have ballistic missiles for their nuclear weapons. But of course, Reagan looked at things differently. Reagan wasn't saying, you know, they're fairly inept. He was saying, what if they're just faking it and they really can do these things? I know this sounds like a silly thing to talk about, but the reality is there were some people that thought the Russians were the baddest bears on the planet, and there were others of us that thought that they were old and that they were they were relatively sickly. And this was the argument. This is going on back and forth. So that's part of this game theory too. Not only were we facing off the Russians, but we have the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, and military intelligence talking about the different capabilities of the Soviets. And we were fighting with each other, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And damn it, I was in Germany at the time with my kids. So if the war had actually started, if the Russians had actually invaded West Germany, there were 500,000 of us, and we were just out of luck. And I was a medic, and I carried my Geneva Convention card with me all the time. I don't have it anymore. I had to turn it in when I left the service. But I carried it with me all the time, because you never knew when something like that was going to happen, when the war was going to start. And there were terrorist groups, communist terrorist groups all over Europe. And they were all over Germany. Baader-Meinhof, I told you last time that they blew up USAFE headquarters. USAFE headquarters stands for United States Air Force Europe. And that was where we would have coordinated the nuclear attack against the Russians from right there at USAFE headquarters. And the terrorists blew it up. blew the place up. As interesting as that is. Anyway, in the 1960s, game theory was still predicting reactions to the Cold War. Deutsch and Krauss in 1960 and then again in 1962 demonstrated that threats were not an effective means of reducing conflict. This happened in the 1960s. So standing there and wearing your sword and walking around and showing everybody how tough you were didn't really work. It was cooperating that worked. Being a bully didn't really work. They developed a game of conflict called the trucking game. The results of the studies showed that when there was an equal reaction to a threat, the threatened side would retaliate against threats in kind, making it a no-win situation. The trucking game is really kind of interesting. You've got a one-way street. You've got a street that you can either drive north or you can drive south on, but two people can't drive on it at the same time. So you have a trucking company, one at one end and one in the north and one in the south, and they both want to use that road. But if I'm on the road, the other trucking company can't be on the road. So the idea was, how in the world, if I need to move my product to make a lot more profit, when do I allow them to be on the road? That's the question. And that's part of the trucking company dilemma. It's really kind of a fascinating. When you take cultural psychology, we talk more about the trucking company or the trucking game. It's really kind of fascinating. I know, it's fascinating. So when you take cultural psychology, we'll talk about that. Because
that played out for me over the past winter. This road between here and Black Rock, it became only one way or the other because it was so muddy.
Right.
And I got stuck, and another car was coming in. We both couldn't be. One of us had to move, and I was stuck. So I told him, I said, if you get out, I was already shoveling. I said, if you get out and help me, because they were saying you need to hurry up and move. And I said, if you help me shovel, I can get out quicker.
Right.
And you can go through, but they wouldn't. So they started honking their horn. So I started taking breaks. Every time they honked their horn, I stopped to break. And we were there for about an hour.
Oh my goodness
and
gracious.
They would honk their horn, and I would set my shovel down and get some Gatorade, and I'd look at them and drink my Gatorade. We did that, so this played out for me. That's what I was
As
thinking.
curious as that is. Now the interesting thing about the trucking game, and the reason this is really fascinating, is because the Russians see things differently than we do. They have a different culture than we do. They have a more autocratic culture. They have a more retaliatory culture. In other words, if you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. That's the way we feel in the United States. In Russia, it doesn't work that way. They will bully you until you make them stop. But if you just leave them alone, then they see that as a weakness, and then they will pick on you. And that's potentially what happened in the last election. Because the Russian mindset is totally different than our mindset. Who are the Russians anyway? Why would they think the same way that we do? See, this is a problem that we have in the military. The military doesn't understand how other people think. So when we were fighting against the Japanese are a very, very different culture. And when we were fighting against the Japanese, we didn't understand what was going to happen next. Because we thought that they would react like an American would react. They would attack where we would attack. They would use the same strategy that we did. But you have to remember, the whole World War II started with a sneak attack, with a surprise attack. And we were just appalled that the Japanese would do this. But the Japanese had done the same thing in 1905 when they fought against the Russians. They started the war with a sneak attack. So should we have looked at what they did in the past to understand what they were going to do in the future? Yes, we should have, but that's not what we did. Why? Because we think that everybody thinks like we do. And this is a mistake. If we think that they're going to act like we do, then we're going to be hurting. And that's exactly what happened in World War II. We didn't start winning the war until 1943. We didn't invade Europe until 1944. We were getting our butts kicked in 1942 until the Battle of Midway, which was at the end of 1942. This is a problem. This is a continual problem that we have. When we're facing people, we need to understand how they think, not what we would do. And sometimes we don't have generals that are smart enough to think like other people. Because they've been trained at West Point, they've been trained in Annapolis, they've been trained to think like Americans, not like Soviets, or not like the Japanese, or not like the Germans. We had no clue what was going to happen next. In Europe we did, because the German culture is very similar to the American culture. So we knew what was going to happen. But when we started fighting in Iraq, my God, like half of the people in the United States are going, be careful because the Sunnis and Shias don't like each other. And the military was going, what's a Sunni? What's a Shia? I mean, they didn't have a clue what was going to happen next. And they wouldn't listen to anybody because they're military people, and military people are smarter than everybody else. Just ask them. And so they got themselves stung, not just once, but over and over and over again. And it took us forever to figure this out. It took them forever to figure that out. So we need to understand other people's cultures to understand what's going to happen next. I mean, the same thing happened with American Indians. The Indian War started in the 17th century, and they were fighting the Indians on the East Coast, whoever they were, the Europeans, whether they were Brits or whether they were the French or whether they were the Spanish. They were fighting those guys. So as they marched across the country and started confronting new tribes, they assumed that they would act the same way that the people did on the East Coast. So their strategies were the same as they were against those tribes. Now the other problem was, as they came into the Great Plains, they were dealing with buffalo hunters. They were dealing with nomadic tribes. They were dealing with a different mindset. But they couldn't change the way that they thought of them because they were used to fighting the Shawnee. They were used to fighting the Sac and Fox. With the Black Hawk War, they were used to fighting East Coast tribes. So they treated you guys the same way they treated those guys. And it was a mistake. The United States military always fights the war that they fought before.
The last war.
The last war, not the war that they're in. They always do that because they can't change the way that they do things. When you train somebody to fight, you train them to fight the war that you know about. So when we went into Iraq, we were fighting the war in Vietnam. We fought like we were fighting the war in Vietnam, which is a war that we lost. Anyway, okay, so why are we talking about this stuff? We're talking about all these games, all this game theory stuff. And this is all very real, and we need to do this because we need to know our opponent. We have to know our opponent. The Germans made a mistake. Their mistake was that they thought that the invasion of Europe was going to come across over at Calais. They thought we were going to be farther north. They thought the invasion was going to come in that area. So that's the area where they put all their tanks. But instead, we went south. Instead of going directly east to Calais, we invaded south to Normandy. And we captured Normandy, and we got the beachhead, and then we just wiped them out. We just marched all the way through France. But they were retreating the whole time, and they were going to mass on the German border, and that's exactly what they did. They stopped us at the Hurtgen Forest. They stopped us in the Belgian forests at the Argonne, the same place they stopped us during World War I. Anyway, so we were fighting. They were fighting the same. They were fighting. They thought we would do what they would do, and not only that, but we decoyed them. We put Patton was our best general, and we had him up north, right across from Calais. So they assumed that's where the attack was going to come. Anyway, not important. Yes, it is. It's very important. Thousands of men have died. Millions of men have died because we keep making these same stupid mistakes over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Why have we been in Afghanistan forever? Since 2001. We're still there. We're still fighting that war. And we're not really winning we're not really winning. The Taliban are winning. And why is that? Well, there's a reason for it. And we could go into it. Okay. This is the trucking dilemma. Is it time? Yeah, it's time. Why don't we stop right here? This is the trucking game, as you can see.